The third age of the world, folio 21 verso. The third age begins with the birth of Abraham, and continues up to David according to the Hebrews 292 years, but according to the 70 interpreters 940 years. Here begins the history of our patriarchs, who worshipped the true God. Abraham, the father of many people, born of Terah of the Chaldees, was a wise man, and a godly one, and the best informed in human affairs. He was the first to proclaim God as the creator of all things, and compelled him to wander forth from Chaldea. He was led forth by his father from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran, and there he lived. And the Lord commanded Abraham, saying, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, and come into a land that I will show thee. Genesis 12:1. When Abraham returned from the slaughter of the 5 kings of Assyria, who had made Lot a prisoner, Melchizedek, king of Salem, and the highest priest of God, came to meet him, and he offered bread and wine. And to him Abraham gave tithes of all the booty he had taken. And Melchizedek blessed Abraham for having subjugated his enemies. The Hebrews say that this Melchizedek was Shem, the first son of Noah, and who lived to Abraham's time. This mysterious stranger here suddenly emerges from the dim past, without ancestors, and without descendants, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. Hebrews 7:3. His name and title are significant, first being by interpretation, King of Righteousness, and after that also King of Salem, which is King of Peace. Hebrews 7:2. From the earliest times there have been strange speculations as to this mysterious man. Some, like the chronicler, have identified him with Shem, supposing that survivor of the flood to have lived to Abraham's time. But if so, why should his name have been changed to Melchizedek, and how could it be said of Shem, with Genesis 11:10-27 before us, that he was without pedigree? Perhaps the better view is to regard him as an exceptional instance in that early time of venerable Hamite, or perhaps, like Abraham, a Shemite who had kept pure from the prevailing idolatry of the world and was a worshipper of the true God. Melchizedek has been held a suitable type of Christ as high priest because, 1. He was a king priest, 2. His name means righteousness, and he was king of Salem, which means peace, 3. His birth and death remain unrecorded, and 4. He was not made a high priest by human appointment. After this the Lord appeared to Abraham, and foretold to him the birth of a son, whom he would multiply to the number of stars in the heavens. The beautiful Sarah was long barren, but when she attained the age of 90 she bore Isaac. Keturah, Abraham's second wife, bore 6 sons, endowed with wisdom and industry. Abraham married her after Sarah's death. The names of the sons are Zamram, Zimran, Joktan, Jokshan, Medon, Madian, Median, Jesbuth, Ishbak, and Shu'ah, Su. Hagar, the concubine of Abraham, was an Egyptian and Sarah's handmaid, and by her Ishmael was born to Abraham. From Ishmael descended the Ishmaelites, later called the Hagarites, and finally called the Saracens. He and his mother were cast out of his father's house. 4. Illustrations: Abraham and Melchizedek. Abraham, in a woodcut 5x8 and 3/8 is returning with his forces from the slaughter of the 5 kings. Melchizedek comes forth from his royal city to meet him, grateful for ridding the land of its invaders and oppressors. He is bringing forth bread and wine, general terms for food and refreshments, in token of his gratitude and of his appreciation of the services of the noble Hebrew. Abraham has stepped forward, and already has the bread in hand. He is about to receive the wine. The abode of Melchizedek is represented as the typical medieval fortified city, and the king himself is coming forth in regal robes, and wearing a crown. Although Abraham is not in fighting armor, his men, who stand back to the left, are accoutered head to foot in medieval helmets and armor, bearing shields, swords, lances, and banners. They look upon the occasion with pride and watchful eyes. B. Lineage of Christ. The genealogies of the third age of the world begin with Abraham, third son of Terah, whom we left at folio 21 recto. There and on the opposite page his descendants through his other 2 sons, Haran and Nahor, were portrayed. The branch representing Abraham was cut immediately below Terah's portrait, and now that branch is presented. Abraham himself is portrayed on folio 22 recto by a panel 9 and 3/4 x2, and 1/4, and from him to the opposite page proceed the branches of his family tree. And here we find the beautiful Sarah, Sarai, Abraham's first wife, but she is still barren, and Isaac will not appear until we reach folio 26 recto. At the opposite extreme of the main trunk appears Hagar, the handmaid of Sarah, and whom Abraham probably brought back with him after his sojourn in Egypt. From her proceeds Ishmael, ancestor of the Arabs, who is portrayed in a dual portrait with his wife. Much importance seems to have been attached to certain numbers in the ancient days, such as 3, 5, 7, 12, 40, etc. The number 12 was not uncommon in the development of tribal descents. According to Genesis 25:12-15, 12 little Arabs were born to Ishmael and his wife, Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jader, Naphish, and Kedmah. Of these, only 2 examples are given in this genealogy, namely, Nebaioth, Nabaioth, and Kedar, Cedar. Between the branches running to Sarah and Hagar appears a third one representing the issue of Abraham by Keturah, Sethurah, whom he took to wife, after the expulsion of Hagar, and the death of Sarah. Of this marriage 6 children were born, all of whom are here portrayed: Zimran, Zamram, Jokshan, Joktan, Medan, Median, Madian, Ishbak, Yesboth, and Shui, Su. Occasionally one encounters difficulty in identifying the names on these portraits. There are 3 general comparisons that may be made, involving the Chronicle itself, the King James Version of the Bible, and the Douay version of the Vulgate. The Chronicle, written when it was, is Catholic in tendency and lore, and the inscriptions are often from the Vulgate. For purposes of investigation and identification, the course should be from Chronicle to Vulgate, and from Vulgate to King James Version. Of course, the text of the Chronicle itself is also helpful in deciphering woodcut inscriptions that are often almost illegible. This illustration, which comprehends 14 portraits, is made up of 3 woodcuts: 1. The large portrait of Abraham; 2. A small wood block of connecting branches; and 3. A woodcut measuring 7 1/8 x 8 13/16 containing Abraham's issue, through 3 channels, with the limitations already mentioned. The full-length portrait of Abraham, in oriental headdress and flowing robes, is very striking and venerable. There is nothing distinctive about the minor portraits. However, one cannot help but marvel at the ingenuity and invention of the artists in cultivating, shaping, and guiding these genealogical vines so as to comfortably accommodate the membral status of every family or tribe within the confines of the text page. We are also struck by the manner in which these artists have solved the problem of presenting these portraits as individual parts of the family tree. All are bust pictures, produced by the interesting contrivance of placing each subject within the calyx of the flower in full bloom. And what a variety of flowers! In these floral pulpits stand the heirs, like so many preachers. In most cases this impression is accentuated, because the incumbent is gesturing, as if addressing a congregation. Folio 22 recto, he incited Isaac to idolatry, and to worshipping idols that he had made. Sarah saw this and said, "Cast out this handmaid, and her son." After Ishmael was born and attained his 12th year, his father had him circumcised, and Sarah loved him as her own son. But when Isaac was born she ceased to love Ishmael, and caused Abraham to send him to another country. And when Ishmael became of age, his mother provided him an Egyptian wife, by whom he had sons who inhabited the entire earth, from the Euphrates to the Red Sea. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bore him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abraham, "Behold now, Jehovah hath restrained me from bearing. Go in, I pray thee, unto my handmaid, it may be that I shall obtain children by her." And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And Hagar bore Abraham a son. And Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael. Genesis 16:1-15. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son. Genesis 17:23-26. And Sarah conceived, and bore Abraham a son in his old age, etc. And Abraham called the name of his son, that was born unto him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham made a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this handmaid, and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And Abraham rose early in the morning, and took bread, and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and gave her the child, and sent her away, and she departed, and wandered into the wilderness of Beersheba. And God was with the lad, and he grew, and he dwelt in the wilderness, etc. And his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. Genesis 21 1-21. And Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Median, Ishbak, and Shui. Genesis 25 1-8. Now these were the generations of Ishmael, by their names according to their generations: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jader, Naphish, and Kedmah, and these are their names by their villages, and by their encampments, 12 princes to their nations. Genesis 25 12-16. The chronicle and the text of Genesis do not agree as to the reason why Sarah wished Hagar and Ishmael expelled from the home. 1. The chronicle states that it was because Ishmael encouraged Isaac to idolatry, and to the worship of idols he had made. 2. The Douay version of the Bible says that she saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian playing with Isaac her son, Genesis 21:9, while 3. The King James version says that she saw Ishmael mocking, an expression which commentators have interpreted to imply carnal or lascivious indulgence on Ishmael's part. However, the real reason is given in the 10th verse: Cast out this bondmaid, and her son, for the son of the bondmaid shall not be heir with my son Isaac. Because they would not worship fire, Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham, and his brother Haran were thrown into the flames. Haran was suffocated, but Abraham was liberated by God, who wished him to bring up Haran's son Lot as his own. According to Genesis 11:28, Haran died before his father Terah, in the land of his nativity, Ur of the Chaldees, but the manner of his death is not given. Abraham and his father Terah lived at Ur, before they were called to the land of Canaan. A number of places have been suggested as the site of this old city, such as Orpha or Orpha in northern Mesopotamia, some 20 miles north of Haran, Warkut in southeastern Mesopotamia, 120 miles southeast of Babylon, and Mugar, a ruined site about 6 miles west of the confluence of the Euphrates and Tigris. And it was a Jewish tradition that the descendants of Terah were driven out of Chaldea because they refused to follow the prevalent idolatry. They left the ways of their ancestors and worshipped the God they knew. So the Chaldeans cast them out from the face of their gods, and they fled to Haran, where they sojourned until they received the call to depart for the land of Canaan. And Abraham took to wife Haran's daughter, Sarah. Thereafter Abraham, together with his father Terah, and his brother Nahor, and the kindred of his brother Haran, wandered from Chaldea to Haran, in Mesopotamia. When his father Terah died, Abraham, at the age of 75 years, in obedience to the command of the Lord, migrated with Lot, Sarah, and all his kindred, and all his good to the land of Canaan, and he lived in Shechem. There the Lord appeared to him and said, To your seed will I give this land. Thereafter Abraham came to the 5 cities, where the Dead Sea now is, and there he also wandered, and he lived in Damascus. But as there was famine in the land, Abraham went down into Egypt, and back from there to the valley of Mer, near Hebron. The Lord appeared to Abraham in his sleep, and told him that his seed would be sojourners in Egypt 430 years, that the 4th generation would return with him to the land of Canaan, and that kings would come out of him in accordance with the Lord's command. Abraham circumcised himself, his son Ishmael, and all his house and kindred. Genesis 17:23-27. Memphis, now called Cairo or Al-Cairo, the royal city in Egypt, was built by Ogolas, probably refers to Agiala, the king of Egypt, and was named Memphis, after his daughter. It is 150 times 1/8 of a mile in circumference, that is, 150 furlongs. A furlong is a measure of length derived from a furrow in an ordinary field, theoretically the side of a square containing 10 acres, 1/8 of a mile. A furlong is now legally 1/8 of a statute mile, that is, 40 ods, or 220 yards, 201.16 meters. A square furlong is 10 acres. The area of Memphis, according to Diodorus, occupied a circuit of 150 stadia, or at least 15 miles. This included much open ground laid out in gardens and courts for the barracks of the garrison in the quarter called the White Castle, and which was successively occupied, under the pharaohs, by the native militia, and is the most celebrated city in Egypt. It is located in the most convenient part of the region, where the river Nile divides into many branches, in the form of the letter D. The references to delta, the fourth letter of the Greek alphabet, which is a triangle, and which corresponds to the English and German letter D4. That trace in a delta is a triangular alluvial deposit at or near the mouth of a river, and almost surrounds the city, giving access to shipping. But navigation farther up is prevented by the overflow of water, that has deposited large mounds of earth to the south. In other regions it has created large seas that make the city secure and inaccessible. For this reason later kings established their residence there, and they called the city Babylon in Egypt, or Cairo. Osiris was worshipped at Memphis. Osiris was the greatest Egyptian divinity, and the husband of Isis. Osiris is described by Plutarch, in his treatise, as a son of Re and Hilois. His Egyptian name is said to have been Hysiris, which is interpreted to mean son of Isis, though some have said that it meant many-eyed, and according to Heliodorus, Osiris was the god of the Nile, as Isis was the goddess of the earth. As he taught the people the use of the plow, so she invented the cultivation of wheat and barley, that were carried about in the processions at her festival. She was the goddess of the earth, which the Egyptians called their mother. Being married to Osiris, Isis is the land fertilized by the Nile. When Osiris inherited the kingdom of Argonorum, Argos, from his forefather, Phoronois, son of Inachos, and Theosia Melia or Archia, was a brother of Ahaziala, and the ruler of Argos. He was married to the nymph Laodice, by whom he became the father of Niobe, Apis, and Car. According to other writers his sons were Pelasgus, Eosos, and Agenor, who, after their father's death, divided the kingdom of Argos among themselves. Phoronois is said to have been the first to offer sacrifices to Hera at Argos, and to have united the people, who until then had lived in scattered habitations, into a city which was called after him. The patronymic Phoronoides is sometimes used for Argibes, in general, and especially to designate Amphiaraus and Adrastus. Apis, the son of Phoronois and Laodice, was also a king of Argos, and from him Peloponnesus was called Appia. He ruled tyrannically, and was killed by Thelchion and Telchius. He sailed over to Egypt in order to enhance his glory. He conquered it, and he married Isis. After he taught the barbarous people many useful things, they honored him as a god, and they changed his name, and called him a bull. Illustration 7x6 and 9/16. There are two woodcuts at folio 22 recto, one of Abraham, already described, and the other of Memphis or Cairo, our present subject. Here we have another general landscape doing special service, as occurred in the previous cases of famous Kira, folio 19 verso, and Nineveh, folio 20 recto. There is nothing Eastern about this scene, and certainly nothing Egyptian. The artist has selected his favorite promontory as a civic site. The town is securely girded about, with the usual battlements, turrets, towers, and gates. To the left is a stream, which we must assume to be the Nile. On its bank grows an iris, or other member of the lily family, but we see no reeds or rushes, in which a little Moses might be concealed. Within the walls the usual Gothic church is prominently silhouetted against the sky. Folio 22 verso. And from this arose the custom, that when a beautiful bull unexpectedly appears to them, they detain him, and for a time they worship him. The references to Apis, the bull of Memphis, worshipped with the greatest reverence, as a god among the Egyptians. They believed him to be the offspring of a young cow impregnated by a ray from heaven. There were certain signs by which he was recognized to be a god. It was necessary that he be quite black, have a white square mark on his forehead, on his back a figure similar to that of an eagle, have two kinds of hair in his tail, and on his tongue a knot resembling an insect called cantharus. When all these signs were discovered, the animal was consecrated with great pomp, and was conveyed to Memphis, where he had a special residence, containing extensive walks and courts for his amusement. His birthday was celebrated every year, and was his most solemn festival. It was a day of rejoicing for all Egypt. The god was allowed to live only a certain number of years, probably 25. If it had not died before the expiration of that time, it was killed and buried in a sacred well, the location of which was unknown except to the initiated. But if the bull died natural death, there was a public and solemn burial, and as his birth filled all Egypt with joy and festivities, so his death threw the whole country into grief and mourning. The worship of Apis was originally nothing but the simple worship of the bull, but in course of time he, like other animals, was regarded as a symbol, and Apis is hence identified with Osiris, or the sun. The Nile, one of the largest rivers in the world, flows by the city of Memphis. Every year, when the sun is in the crab, it overflows the entire land of Egypt. Memphis now belongs to the Saracens. After the foundation of Alexandria, Memphis sank into a provincial city. But the Saracen invaders in the 7th century confirmed the wisdom of Menes' choice, for they built both Old and New Cairo in the neighborhood of Memphis, only changing the site from the western to the eastern bank of the Nile, because their natural alliances, unlike those of the pharaohs, were with the Arabians and the Syrian Caliphate. It is a fine, well-populated city, and possessed of rich estates. There, in a large castle, lives the all-powerful Sultan. The city is divided into two parts, called New Babylon and Al-Cairo. Here once lived Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. To this country came the glory-deserving Virgin Mary, with the child Jesus, and Joseph. And here are the foremost balsam gardens. To this place many men of learning have journeyed, as Pythagoras and Plato, and see, here is to be found the wisdom of the Babylonians. In this country many columns have been erected to the memory of the dead, and other monuments to matters worthy of remembrance, concerning which many from far and wide have written. Memphis was the first capital of the entire kingdom of Egypt, after the Deltic monarchy at Heliopolis was united to the Thebaid capital at this or Abydos. It stood on the western bank of the Nile 15 miles south of Sarkassaurus. Its foundation belongs to the earliest age of Egyptian history. It is ascribed to Menes, the first mortal king, 2. to Korois, a monarch of a later dynasty, and 3. to Apis or Apoph. The latter two are doubtful. The motives that induced the founder to select the site of Memphis as his capital are obvious. Not far removed from the bifurcation of the Nile at Sarkassaurus, it commanded the south entrance to the delta, while it was nearer to the Thebaid and any of the deltaic provincial cities of importance, Heliopolis, Bubastis, and Sais. He placed it on the western bank, because he had little to apprehend from the tribes of the Libyan desert, whereas the eastern frontier of Egypt was always exposed to attack from Arabia, Assyria, and Persia, and it was not beyond the reach of the Scythians. It was important, therefore, to make the Nile a barrier of the city. This was accomplished by placing Memphis to the west of it. However, before Mendes could lay the foundations of his capital, an artificial area had to be provided for them. The Nile, at that remote period, seems to have had a double bifurcation, one at the head of the delta, the other above the side of Memphis, and parallel with the Nome. Of the branches of its southern fork, the western and the wider of the two ran at the foot of the Libyan hills, the eastern and lower was the present main stream. Between them the plain, though resting on a limestone base, was covered with marshes, caused by their periodical overflow. This plain Menes chose for the site of Memphis. He began by constructing an embankment about 100 stadia south of its site, that diverted the main body of the water into the eastern arm, and the marshes he drained off into two principal lakes, one to the north, the other to the west of Memphis, which thus, on every side, but the south, was defended by water. Athasis, styled a son of Menes, is said to have built the palace, and thus stamped the new city as a royal residence. In the reign of Khethos, 2nd dynasty, the worship of Apis was established at Memphis. In Abraham's 99th year the Lord appeared unto him and assured him that a son would be born unto him by his wife Sarah. And he called him Isaac. When Isaac was 25 years of age, the Lord, in order to test Abraham's obedience, commanded him to sacrifice his son. Abraham hastened to fulfill the command. And as he approached the altar and was about to slaughter his son, God recognized the man's obedience, and called out, "Abraham, lay not thy hand upon the lad, for now I know that thou fearest the Lord." And soon thereafter the Lord unexpectedly brought forth a ram. And as Abraham was obedient to God, the sweet promise of Christ came unto him. And God said to him, In your name will be blessed all the people, for you were obedient to my voice. This is a rather severe abridgment of the biblical narrative, Genesis 22:1-19, which should be read to fully appreciate the illustration. Zoroaster the Wise was, as Isidore states, a king of Bactria, for whom King Ninus slew in battle, and who ordered his books to be burned. Of him Solinus thus writes, Although the first sound given off by newly born children is that of crying, and their sense of joy is postponed for 42 days, yet we know of one, called Zoroaster, who laughed on the day he was born. He was the first wise man or magician, magi, and he studied the stars, and made 20 times 100,000 verses. This same accomplishment Democritus, a celebrated Greek philosopher, was born about 460 BCE. He spent a large inheritance on travels that he undertook to satisfy his unusual thirst for knowledge. He journeyed over a large part of Asia, and spent some time in Egypt. His diligence was incredible, and he lived exclusively for his studies. He died in poverty in the year 361, but highly esteemed by his fellow citizens. He lost his eyesight probably through severe application to his studies, but this did not disturb the cheerful disposition of his mind, which prompted him to look, in all circumstances, at the cheerful side, and for this reason later writers took to mean that he always laughed at the follies of men. His knowledge was very extensive, his style lively. He and Leucippus, another philosopher, were the founders of the theory of atoms. In order to explain the creation of all things, Democritus maintained that in infinite space there are an infinite number of atoms, or elementary particles, homogeneous in quality, but heterogeneous in form, that these atoms combine, and that all things arise from the infinite variety of form, order, and position of these atoms in forming combinations. The cause of these combinations he calls chance. He does not use the word in its ordinary sense, but to signify the necessary succession of cause and effect. In his ethical philosophy he considers the acquisition of peace of mind as the end and ultimate object of our actions, long thereafter enlarged upon. Zoroaster flourished in the time of Terah, father of Abraham. Zoroaster, or Zoroastrus, the Zarathustra of the Zendavesta and the Zendusht of the Persians, was the founder of the ancient Magian nor Persian religion. The religion of Zoroaster, held by the modern Parsis, was known to antiquity as the religion of the Magi. The religion was probably of Bactrian origin. The statement that he laughed on the day he was born is from Pliny, Natural History, 7:15. The accompanying illustration of a king with crown, orb, and scepter, has no particular application to Zoroaster, except as indicated by the inscription. Illustration: Abraham about to sacrifice his son Isaac, 5:8 and 7/8. The Lord is testing Abraham's obedience by ordering him to sacrifice his son as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains. Abraham rose early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took with him 2 of his young men, and his son Isaac, and prepared the wood for the burnt offering. And he went up to the place of which God had told him. As he saw the place afar off, he told his young men to stay with the ass, while he and his son would ascend the mountain and worship. The artist has made the best of the space allowed him within the confines of the woodcut. He has portrayed several successive actions in this single illustration. The picture falls into 2 divisions, separated by a narrow trail leading to the place of sacrifice. To the right the stern old patriarch dashes into the picture, a pot of fire in his hand, and the sacrificial sword under his arm. He is rushing his son, upon whose shoulders he has placed the wood of the burnt offering. The little lad is stooping forward under his burden. He certainly does not appear the 25 years which the chronicler has placed to his credit. In vain he looks about him for the lamb that is necessary to the offering, but his father assures him that the good God will provide a sacrifice. And so they went together, and with them we cross the trail to the other side of the picture, where the diligent father has already built an altar, and has laid the wood in order. And now to the sacrifice. Little Isaac is kneeling on a low dais supported by squat little legs or columns. He is not lying on the altar, nor is he bound, as the Bible describes. His hands are outstretched, and his father, who stands behind him, holds him by the hair with his left hand, while with a huge broadsword, not a sacrificial knife, held aloft in his right hand, he is about to deal the fatal blow. The angel of the Lord swoops down upon the scene, and suspends the action, uttering the injunction of the Lord, that the lad is not to be harmed, for the test is complete. And, according to Genesis, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. The ram of Genesis had conveniently ensnared itself for the sacrifice, but not so the ram of the woodcutter. It is doubtful whether Abraham sees it behind him, free, and vigorously rampant, and apparently about to buck the old patriarch from the rear, as if to second the efforts of the angel in checking the bloody work. It is a relief to know that soon the heavy broadsword will find its way back to the scabbard, which lies beside the executioner, and that the blazing cauldron, in the foreground, will shortly be extinguished. The kaleidoscopic character of this illustration, portraying a number of successive actions at the same time, was common to this as well as far earlier periods, and repeats itself in our own day, in the moving picture film. On one hand the victim is being driven to the block, on the other the fatal drama is being enacted. Another thing that strikes us in these woodcuts is the lack of proportion in the figures, the head being too large for the body, giving a rather juvenile appearance to the characters, in spite of their somber and aged visages. This proportion is a characteristic of children, and hence this impression arises naturally. According to Josephus, Isaac was 24 at this time, but there is no indication of his age in Genesis. Folio 23 Recto Trier, Trebes, is an old city. It came into being in 1947 BC, in Abraham's time. It was founded by Trebetanius, the king's brother, who was driven out of Assyria by Semiramis, the queen, and settled in the neighborhood of Germania, the land of the Germans. For when Ninus the Great died, Semiramis fostered a suspicion against his brother, and she became his enemy. Semiramis and Ninus were the founders of the Assyrian Empire of Ninus or Nineveh. Ninus was a great warrior, who built Nineveh about 2182 BCE, and subdued the greater part of Asia. Semiramis was the daughter of the fish goddess Derceto of Ascalon in Syria, by a Syrian youth, but being ashamed of her weakness, she made away with the youth, and exposed her infant daughter. But the child was miraculously preserved by doves, who fed her till she was discovered by the shepherds of the neighborhood. She was brought up by the chief shepherd of the royal herds, whose name was Semus, and from whom she derived her name of Semiramis. Her beauty attracted one of the king's generals, who married her. He subsequently sent for his wife, to join him, where the Assyrians were engaged in the siege of Bactra, which they had long endeavored in vain to take. Upon her arrival in camp she planned an attack upon the citadel of the town, mounted the walls with a few brave followers, and obtained possession of the place. Ninus was so charmed with her beauty and bravery, that he resolved to make her his wife, whereupon her unfortunate husband put an end to his life. By Ninus, Semiramis had a son Ninus, and on the death of Ninus she succeeded him on the throne. Her fame overshadowed that of her husband, and later ages loved to tell of her marvelous deeds and heroic achievements. She built numerous cities and erected many wonderful buildings. Besides conquering many nations of Asia, she subdued Egypt and a great part of Ethiopia, but was unsuccessful in an attack upon India. After a reign of 42 years she resigned the sovereignty to her son Ninus, and disappeared from the earth, taking her flight to heaven in the form of a dove. Probably Semiramis was originally a Syrian goddess, perhaps the same who was worshipped at Ascalon as Astarte, or Aphrodite, to whom the dove was sacred. Hence the stories of her voluptuousness, which were current even in the time of Augustus. After the entire country beyond the Rhine had been subjugated by Emperor Julius, he appointed a proconsul, and a collector of taxes or tribute, who remained there during the Roman rule. The city of Trier was always wealthy and rich in its possessions, and a venerable and honored principality among the 5 Belgian cities. Its archbishop holds high rank among the 7 electors of the Roman Empire. There are many proofs of its antiquity, among them a Latin inscription discovered in our time, which mentions the above-named Trebeta and Semiramis. There also may be seen a place of wonderful construction, resembling Babylonian masonry, made of baked tiles so strong that even now it is invulnerable to the enemy, and cannot be broken by any kind of implement. The citizens of the city are universally respected for their manners, elegance, and laws, by the merchants who constantly come there to trade, and to establish commercial relations. In consequence of the proximity of Trier to Germany, the people speak the German language, and in taste, conduct, and seriousness in war there is but little difference between them. Among the Gauls they are considered exceptionally powerful, and are esteemed for their cavalry and infantry. Here also may be seen a gate made of incredibly large stones, fastened together with iron, also the body of Saint Simeon, and that of the worthy Bishop Popionis, in the church he founded. This city first received the gospel of Christ from Bishop Valerius, St. Peter's disciple, and it was later enlightened by St. Paulinus, the holy man, also a bishop there, who was afterward exiled by Emperor Constantius for his Christian faith, and he suffered an exile to the time of his death, finally receiving the crown of martyrdom in Frisia. There also flourished Bishop Maximus, by whom Pope Anastasius was honorably received when pursued by the Emperor Constantius. Here also flourished Bishop Niconas, a man of perfect holiness, and many others, and c. Trier or Treves, respectively the German and French names, is a cathedral city on the Moselle River, in western Prussia. It was originally a Roman colony, named Augusta Treviorum, after the Emperor Augustus. It became an imperial free city in the 16th century. The ancient city stood on the right bank of the river, and, under the later empire, was one of the most flourishing Roman cities north of the Alps. It was the capital of Belgica Prima. The Belgi were one of three great people into which Caesar divided the population of Gaul. They were bounded on the north by the Rhine, on the west by the ocean, on the south by the Sequana, Seine, and Matron, Marne, and on the east by the territory of the Treveri. They were of German origin, and had settled in this country, expelling or reducing to subjection its former inhabitants. They were subdued by Caesar after courageous resistance. After the division of the Roman world into 4 districts by Diocletian, 292 CE, Trier became the residence of the Caesar, who had the government of Britain, Gaul, and Spain. Here dwelled Constantine Chlorus and his son Constantine the Great, as well as several subsequent emperors. The modern city still contains many interesting remains. The most important of these is the Porta Nigra, or Black Gate, a large and massive building, in an excellent state of preservation. There are also extensive remains of Roman baths, of the amphitheatre, and of the Palace of Constantine. The piers of the bridge over Moselle are likewise Roman. The Treveri were a powerful people in Gallia Belgica. Illustration: the city of Treves 7 and 9/16 Sax 8 and 7/8. This landscape, entitled Trier, appears here for the first time, but it will do service for other cities and towns in the future. It is located on a sea, or a river, which we may assume to be the Moselle. Although it has all the earmarks of a well-fortified European medieval city, the huge dome at the right, surmounted with a crescent, tends to confuse this first impression. Are we really on the Moselle, or is this the Bosphorus? To the right of this structure is a pillar-shaped tower surmounted with a strident figure carrying a staff, or it may be a fork, for the figure itself appears to have horns. It is a comfort to assume that this is a statue, for another stab or two would be suicidal. To the left of the dome, and hugging it rather closely, is a Catholic church, whose many-storied bell tower vies with a crescent in its aerial aspirations. From this part of the city a road leads upward to a fort or castle, whose upper reaches are made accessible by a ladder. Although we see no one about except the lively figure on the pedestal, the town must be well populated, for it is well supplied with residences, all gabled. There is also a generous supply of city gates. Over one of these is a shield, but its field is blank, adding to the general utility of the woodcut. To the extreme left, beyond the formidable city wall, is open country, suggesting the fields from which the citizens no doubt receive their sustenance. The principal gate, flanked by towers, is made accessible by a rather precarious and meager plank bridge. 2 other gates give access by water. Folio 23 verso Damascus is the first city, and a principal one of Assyria. Of all the cities of Asia it is about the oldest. According to the Holy Scriptures, it is supposed to have been founded by the servants of Abraham. It has fields. By nature its soil is dry and unproductive. It is supplied with water by means of aqueducts. By this means the soil is irrigated, and made very productive, and where shaded by foliage, it is most excellent. A lone small river flows by the walls and battlements. A small tongue of land, extending behind the battlements, is covered with a growth of most luxuriant vegetation. This estimable city is removed from Jerusalem, by a 6 days' journey. In it the Apostle St. Paul received baptism. Nearby is the place where he saw a strong light from heaven, and heard a voice, "Saul, Paul, why do you persecute me?" After his baptism he preached the Lord Christ in the Jewish synagogues. Because of the secret animosity of the Jews he escaped over the walls in the night by means of a basket. The journey to Damascus was the turning point in Saul's life. Until then he had been a zealous Jew, determined with all the ardor of youth to uphold the traditions of his fathers. As a young man he acquiesced in the stoning of Stephen, holding the clothes of those who murdered him. He persecuted the Christians in Jerusalem, and thereafter secured authority from the high priest to go to Damascus to arrest all the disciples and to bring them bound to Jerusalem. As he approached the city he was struck by a blinding light, and he heard the voice of Christ, as stated by the chronicler. He was led into Damascus, and there instructed and baptized by Ananias. Immediately he confessed Christ in the synagogues of Damascus, and retired into Arabia for spiritual preparation. He returned to Damascus while the deputy or ethnarch of the Nabatean king Aretas held the city, and Paul was persecuted there, making his escape over the walls of the city, as the Nuremberg chronicler has already stated. And there is still to be seen to this day the house of Ananias, from whom St. Paul received baptism. This city suffered much by opposition and attack. At last King Conrad undertook a crusade into Asia, and he brought 3 Christian princes, a cardinal, who was also a legate, and the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and many bishops, before Damascus. Our princes, pursuant to wise counsel, laid siege to the city, but it was fortified by high and stout battlements, so that it could not be taken by force. Yet, in a short time it might have been captured, for had the water required by the inhabitants been cut off, they would not have been able to sustain the cattle and horses which they may have taken into the city for defense and sustenance, and the city wells would have proven inadequate for so large a population. Now as the inhabitants feared that the secret ducts and hidden drains that supplied them would be cut off, and the wells become polluted, there came among them an Assyrian of arch cunning. He received money from the Damascans, and he advised the Christian kings to remove their forces to another place, and to besiege it if the inhabitants resisted. And as this change took place, the Damascans were again able to use their water supply, and they so fortified themselves that the river was again in their power, and its use denied our people. In consequence it was no longer available for bringing up supplies, resulting in a shortage of scarcity of food and sustenance. Thereby the siege was broken up, and the kings, Conrad and Ludwig, led their forces into Europe, and came home. In the year of our Lord 1052 Damascus is an exceedingly ancient city, being first mentioned in the history of Abraham's pursuit of the defeated kings, Genesis 14:15, for which reason, no doubt, the chronicler had introduced it in his third age of the world, which begins with Abraham. It was also the birthplace of Eliezer, the old patriarch's steward, Genesis 15:2. Josephus ascribes its foundation to Uz, a grandson of Shem. It was the capital of Syria during the Hebrew monarchy, and the Syrian king is called the king of Damascus. In the annals of Christianity it is noted for the conversion and first preaching of Paul. It is situated about 60 miles from the Mediterranean, and at the extremity of the great desert of El Horan. It is surrounded by a wall, which is, however, in a ruinous state of decay, and scarcely defines the limits between the city and its suburbs. The Crusaders never succeeded in firmly establishing themselves at Damascus. The bulk of the city is set along the main stream of the Barada River. On its approach to the city walls the river has much of its water drawn off through channels, by which it is conveyed to every corner of the city. Despite various drawbacks, her rich streams, bursting, as they do, on the very edge of the desert, and creating a delicious verdure, have won for Damascus the name of the earthly paradise of the Arab world. It is an indispensable harbor of refuge in the desert, the market of the nomads, the outpost of the Mediterranean world. She has survived wars and changes of empire that have overthrown or reduced to poverty every other great city of that part of the world. This is due to the combination of rich fertility with a position so forward on the desert. Illustration: the city of Damascus 5 5/8 x 8 7/8. Another medieval city, located on a promontory, and surrounded by a wall. There is nothing about it that shouts Middle Eastern. It might pass for Nuremberg, but never for Damascus. The salvation of this little town is well provided for in the two large churches. The first is provided with a single tower and 2 crosses, the second with 2 towers, but no denominational symbols. In spite of its frowning walls, it seems a more cheerful place, and the landscapes that have gone before. The artist was here sure of his architecture. There is no confusion of building styles. There is considerable vegetation. Folio XXIII recto Hispania had its origin, after the time of Tubal, from Peleg, his son. According to Peleg was not a son of Tubal, but of Heber, the ancestor of the Hebrews. Tubal, on the other hand, was a son of Japheth. Josephus identifies Tubal with the Iberians, who once dwelt between the Caspian and Black Seas. Some of the Iberians settled in the east, some in the west, for he went out of Armenia, and established a seat there. Before that, Hispania was also called Iberia. It is the region that begins at the Pyrenees, and proceeds about the Pillars of Hercules, and reaches up to the northerly sea. Everything within this circumference is considered as belonging to Hispania. Its size is unbelievable, as Apianus, the historian, states, for it is 10,000 of a mile, 10,000 furlongs wide, and almost as long. Various peoples of different names have lived there. This region also has many navigable waters, and is productive and rich in wheat, wine, oil, metals of all kinds, and animals that are serviceable to man. In particular, it produces an overabundance of swift and sturdy horses. For 300 years Hispania was warred upon by Scipio, Gracchus, Albinus, Cato, Metellus, Pompey the emperor, and others, and was by them added to their country. The Cantabri were a people in northern Spain. The Romans originally gave this name to all the people on the north coast of Spain, but when they became better acquainted with the country, the name was restricted to the people bounded on the east by Astures, and on the west by the Outrogones. The Cantabri were a fierce and warlike people, and were only subdued by Augustus, after a struggle of several years, 25 to 19 BCE, and finally the people called the Cantabri were warred against by Augustus. But as Hispania appeared obedient to the Romans, and gave them assistance, the latter never conducted a war of note against the Hispanic Knights. And to this day there are still to be seen in Hispania many indications of the presence of the Romans. Many cities in Hispania were garrisoned by the Romans from time to time. From this country we have not only received Quintilian, Seneca, Lucan, Lucius Florus, Pomponius Mela, Silius, Italicus, Martial, Orosius, 1, Quintilian, Marcus Fabius, c. 35 to 95 CE, Roman rhetorician, was a native of Caligaris, Spain, and for 20 years head of the foremost school of oratory in Rome. His greatest work is a manual on the training of public speakers. 2. Seneca, Lucius, Annaeus, 3 BCE 65 CE, Roman philosopher, statesman, and author, and his father, Ammianus Seneca, were both natives of Cordova, Spain. 3. Lucan, Ammianus, was also born at Cordova, 39 CE. His father, Annaeus Mela, was a brother of Seneca the elder. Lucan was a Roman poet. His only extant production is a heroic poem in 10 books, entitled Pharsalia. He was sentenced to death by Nero, at the age of 26, but followed the example of his uncle Seneca, opening his veins. Both died 65 CE. 4. Lucius Annaeus Florus, Roman historian of the time of Trajan and Hadrian, complied, chiefly from Livy, a brief sketch of the history of Rome, to 25 BCE, entitled. It is a rhetorical panegyric of Rome's greatness. Although not accurate, it was much used in the Middle Ages. Florus was of the family of Seneca and Lucan. 5. Pomponius Mela was the author of the first Roman treatise on geography, a mere compendium of less than 100 pages, dry in style and deficient in method, but of pure Latinity, and occasionally relived by pleasing word pictures. It is the only treatise on the subject in classical Latin. He divides the earth in 5 zones, only to be inhabitable, and asserts the existence of indigenous peoples who inhabit the southern temperate zone, inaccessible to the people of the northern temperate regions by reason of the unbearable heat of the intervening torrid zone. Nothing is known of him except name and birthplace, the small town of Tingentera of Singentera, Spain. 6. Silius Italicus, Roman poet, was born about 25 CE, but where is not known. His great work was a heroic poem in 17 books, entitled, which has descended to us in its entirety. It is a dull, Heavy work, treating of the Second Punic War. 7. Martial M. Valerius, the epigrammatical poet, was born at Bilbilis, Spain, 43 CE. His extant works consist of a collection of short poems, all included under the general appellation. They are a copious source of information on Roman customs and habits during the 1st century of the Empire. 8. Orosius Paulus was a Spanish presbyter and Latin historian, c. 390–430 CE, has, and are still extant. The pagans, having been accustomed to complain that the ruin of the Roman Empire must be ascribed to the wrath of the ancient deities, whose worship had been abandoned, Orosius composed his history, to demonstrate that the world always has been the scene of calamities as great as the empire was then suffering the teachers and writers, but also such most useful and brilliant rulers as Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and the Theodosii, in pagan times. But to the honor of Christ, Hispania gave birth to St. Lawrence. St. Lawrence, Laurentius, was one of the Christian martyrs. The basilica reared over his tomb is still visited by pilgrims. Deacon of Pope Sixtus II, he was called upon by the judge to bring forth the treasures of the church committed to his keeping. So he produced the church as poor people. Seeing his bishop being led to punishment, he cried, "Father, where do you go without your son? Holy priest, where do you go without your deacon?" Sixtus prophesied that Lawrence would follow him in 3 days, and so he did, being burned alive on a gridiron. In the midst of his torments he addressed the judge with these ironical words, "Assum est, versa et manduco, I am roasted enough on this side, turn me round, and eat." So says the legend. The date of the martyrdom is usually put during the persecution of Valerian, in 258. The punishment of the gridiron, and the speech of the martyr are probably a reminiscence of the story of the Phrygian martyrs, as related by Socrates, 3:5. But even the fact of the martyrdom is questioned, and Saint Vincent, or Vincentius, was also a deacon and martyr. He is said to have been born of noble parents in Spain, and educated by Valerius, Bishop of Saragossa, who ordained him to the diaconate. Under the persecution of Diocletian, Vincent was arrested and taken to Valentia, tortured and thrown into prison. There the angels visited him, lighting his dungeon, and relieving his suffering. Seeing this, his warders became Christians. He died while new tortures were being prepared. His body, exposed to the wild beasts in vain, was thrown into the sea, but was recovered and buried Valerius deacon, and at almost the same time to Eucritia, and other martyrs without number. Ferdinand, the king, and Elizabeth, the queen, have followed in their footsteps, and in the year 1491, in the end of that year, they brought the great city of Granada, called Ilapula, to the worship of Christ, and to Christian obedience. In 1482 Boabdil deposed his father, and became the last Moorish sultan of Granada. However, the gradual advance of the Christians under Ferdinand and Isabella, not Elizabeth, forced him to entrust the task of defense to the more warlike hands of Muley Hassan and Azagul, 1483–86. Finally, in 1491 Boabdil was compelled to sign away his kingdom, and on January 2, 1492, a year before the Nuremberg Chronicle was published, the Spanish army entered Granada, and the Moorish power in Spain was ended. The Kingdom of Bohemia had its origin in the Wendic people. The term Wendic is here used by the chronicler in the sense of Slavic, that is, to designate a class of the northern division of the Aryan family, embracing the Letic and Slavonic branches, or groups. Wens is an early German name applied to the Lusitanian branch of the Slavic race dwelling in Saxony and Prussia, who left the plain of Shinar, and migrated from Asia to Europe. Among them was one Cachus, a Croatian, of no mean birth, and he made a nation of the Bohemians. At that time Bohemia was not built up, but still consisted of forests and coarse vegetation better suited to wild animals than to man. But as his brother Lech, a companion to misfortune, saw that his brother had become rich in lands and cattle, and had grown powerful, he migrated eastward and established his residence in a large open plain. And he called the region Poland. Czech and Lech were brothers, and the original ancestors of the Bohemians, Czechs, and the Poles, Lechs. Bohemia is the Latin name for Czechy. As their progeny increased, they acquired a large amount of territory. After the death of Cachus, the people chose Kruk as a prince. He built a castle at Stena, and when he died he left 3 daughters, Libusa, Brella, and Thurba. Libusa, the oldest daughter, ruled the land after her father's death, and she fortified the castle called Yaret with Shayrod. Brela was a physician, learned in herbs and medicines. Thurba was a seeress and mistress of good fortune. But the Bohemians thought it unreasonable that so much power and might should be vested in a woman. On a certain occasion Libusa spoke to a large assembly of her people. "I have ruled considerately and wisely, and now you shall be free. I will give you a man who will be of service to you. Go and lead my horse into the fields. Follow it where it may go. At least the horse will stop before a man who is eating from an iron table. He shall be my husband and a lawful prince." Now as the horse was released, it finally stopped before a plowman, called Primislaus. He had reversed his plow and was eating his meal of cheese on the iron plowshare, which was the iron table. They made him a duke and set him upon a horse. And he took with him his shoes made of flax. When they asked him why he took these with him, he replied and said, "I am taking them with me and will keep them at Yaret so that my descendants may know who, among the Bohemians, received the principality." For a long time thereafter this country was ruled by dukes. And thereafter, since the time of the Emperor Frederick I, of great glory among kings, and until the outbreak of heresy, this country flourished under various kings and emperors. The early history of the Czechs is very obscure and confused with that of the Slavs in general. Cosmas of Prague, 1045 to 1125, not to be confused with Cosmas of Alexandria, was the earliest Bohemian historian. His Chronica Bohemorum Liber 3, which contains the history and traditions of Bohemia almost to the time of his death, has earned him the title of the Herodotus of his country. He relates that Cachus, a noble of Croatia, probably White Croatia or Galicia, having committed a homicide, fled with his followers to Bohemia, and first settled on the Rip mountain, near Roudnice. That Libusa, the youngest, our chronicler says the oldest, of his 3 daughters, became ruler of Bohemia, founded Prague, and married a plowman, who became the founder of the Přemyslides, or first native dynasty. It is probable that the Slavs arrived in Bohemia, which was then inhabited by Germanic tribes, not later than the 7th century CE, or perhaps earlier. They are first mentioned in 805 CE, and the first certain historical state in these provinces is the Kingdom of Great Moravia, destroyed by the Magyars, in 904–905. While Slovakia now passed under Magyar rule, the Czechs founded the Kingdom of Bohemia, which for centuries was among the most powerful and glorious in Europe. During this early period the religious movement among the Czechs, under the leadership of John Hus, influenced all Europe. Folio XXIII verso Babylon was a celebrated city in Chaldea. Although Belus, the son of Nimrod, reigned in Babylonia for many years, the kingdom remained small. Yet the Greek and Roman historians, as well as the poets, say that the city was built by Semiramis, the queen, and enlarged and fortified with the wall made of baked bricks cemented together with sand, pitch, and lime. The earth there contains these materials. This city was so noble that all Chaldea and Mesopotamia were named after it. The wall, as Philostratus 170–245, was a Greek sophist and rhetorician of Rome. He is the biographer of Apollonius of Tyana, a Greek philosopher of the Neo-Pythagorean school, born of a few years before the Christian era. The narrative of the travels of Apollonius, as given by his disciple Damas, and reproduced by Philostratus, is so full of the miraculous that many have regarded him as an imaginary character. On his return to Europe from his Asiatic travels, Apollonius was received with reverence as a magician. Finally he set up a school at Ephesus, where he died, apparently at the age of 100 years. His life by Philostratus is generally regarded as a religious work of fiction. Very little is known of the career of Philostratus. He was probably born at Lemnos, studied rhetoric under Proclus, and taught at Athens, and settled in Rome. He wrote a number of works in addition to his, upon which his fame chiefly rests. His is not really biographical, but consists of picturesque impressions of leading representatives. It contains matters of interest concerning the Olympian games and contests. It breathed the spirit of the new comedy, and the Alexandrine poets. Portions of 33 are almost literally translated in Ben Jonson's song to Celia, "Drink to me only with thine eyes" states, is 380 times 1/8 of a mile, 380 furlongs in circumference, but Pliny says its circumference was 64,000 paces, its thickness 50 elbows, an obsolete measurement of length, same as cubit, being the length of the forearm measured from the elbow to the end of the middle finger, and varying from 18 to 21.888 inches. Generally reckoned at 21 inches, and its height 4 times as much. With its battlements, pleasure gardens, temples, and towers, the city was wonderful indeed. Semiramis also brought Ethiopia under her sway, and she made war upon India, against which only she and Alexander had conducted a campaign up to that time. How Babylonia was destroyed is recorded hereafter in its proper place. The first king of the Assyrians, as Eusebius writes, was Ninus, the son of Belus. Ninus reigned 52 years, and his wife Semiramis 42 years after him. Then for 38 years Samius should be Ninus the son of both, and thereafter one king after another up to Sardanapalus, the 36th king, who was totally inclined to carnal excesses and audacity. Then the kingdom of Assyria was destroyed by Artas, the Mede, and added to Media, in the 4th year of Azariah, the king of Judea. The duration of the kingdom of Assyria, from the first year to the last king, is reckoned as 1240 years. Sardanapalus, the last king of the Assyrian Empire of Ninus or Nineveh, was noted for his luxury, licentiousness, and effeminacy. He passed his time in his palace unseen by any of his subjects, dressed in female apparel, surrounded by his concubines. At length Arbaces, whom the chronicler refers to as Artas, satrap of Media, and Belus, the noblest of the Chaldean priests, resolved to renounce allegiance to such a worthless monarch, and at the head of a formidable army advanced against Nineveh. Suddenly the effeminate prince threw off his luxurious habits, and appeared an undaunted warrior. Twice he defeated the rebels, but was at length worsted, and obliged to shut himself up in Nineveh. Here he sustained a siege of 2 years, till at length the Tigris, having undermined part of the city wall, and finding it impossible to hold out any longer, he collected all his treasures, wives, and concubines, and placing them on an immense pile, set it on fire in his palace, and thus destroyed both himself and them. His enemies then obtained possession of the city. The death of Sardanapalus and the fall of the Assyrian Empire is dated to 876 BCE. Modern writers have shown that this narrative is mythical, and must not be received as genuine history. The legend of Sardanapalus, who so strangely appears at one time as sunk in the lowest effeminacy, and immediately afterwards as an heroic warrior, has probably arisen from his being the same with the god Sandon, who was worshipped extensively in Asia, both as an heroic and as a female divinity. The name Sardanapalus is derived from that of Assurbanipal, the rebel son of Shalmaneser II, whose reign ended with the fall of Nineveh in 823 BCE. His character is that ascribed to Assurbanipal. Item, concerning Semiramis. Valerius Maximus, a Latin writer, flourished in the reign of Tiberius. His narratives are loosely and irregularly arranged, and are from Roman history, but each section includes extracts from the annals of other peoples, principally the Greeks. The author's chief sources are Cicero, Livy, Sallust, and Pompeius Trogus. He often used sources now lost, and affords us some glimpses of much debated and imperfectly recorded reign of Tiberius. He intimates that this book is to be used as a commonplace book of historical anecdotes for use in the schools of rhetoric. The collection was very popular in the Middle Ages. Relates that once upon a time, when she was having her hair dressed, and it was announced to her that Babylon was defeated or repulsed, she ran with her hair half braided, to again give battle for the city, and she paid no further attention to her coiffure, until she again had the city in her power. The column in the illustration shows her statue. Jupiter, the first in heaven, and, as they say, Diaphilius, he was not called Diasphilius, the son of heaven, but Dispiter, of which Jupiter, more correctly Jupiter, was a contraction, originally identical with Divum, heaven, and Pater, father. Jupiter literally means the heavenly father. The German translation son of the day is clearly incorrect, and otherwise called Lysania, a corruption of Lyca, a certain local deity, referred to in a subsequent note on Jupiter, being known to the Greeks as Zeus. Lyca was at these times greatly esteemed in Arcadia. Because of his virtue he was given the highly renowned name of Jupiter. He traces his origin to the son of Heber, namely, Gerari. Heber was a descendant of Shem, one of the 3 sons of Noah, and the father of Peleg, the ancestor of Abraham, and Joktan, the ancestor of the 13 tribes of Joktanite Arabs. One of these 13 sons was Yerah, and no doubt it is his stock to whom the chronicler refers as Gerari. The chronicler's claim that the supreme Greek deity traces his origin along Semitic lines is wrong. The Greeks traced their ancestry through Javan, one of the sons of Japheth, representing the Aryan branch of the human race. On a previous page the chronicler himself stated that of Javan came the Greeks, and the Ionians, folio 16 recto. See also Genesis 11:26 period, and since he was a man of great intelligence, and observed that the Attic people were uncouth and lived almost like animals, he gave them laws, and prescribed a formula of correct living, and human conduct. And when he had succeeded in bringing them to observe good morals, he admonished them to worship gods, and to institute altars, temples, and priests. He taught them to observe the institution of lawful marriage, whereas theretofore they all had wives in common, and many other useful matters they learned from him. Now as the forest folk observed these things, and wondered thereat, they came to consider him a god, called him Jupiter, because of his resemblance to the planet Jupiter, which, as the astronomers say, is by nature warm and moist in due proportions, virtuous and patient, and by reason of his patience, fearless in the presence of danger. And so, because of his qualities, he was adjudged the equal of the planet, and named after him. They say he is not a mundane, but celestial being. The ancients credited him with many children such as Minerva, Apis, Sol, Diana, Mercury, and 7 others. Jupiter, so called by the Romans, and the Zeus of the Greeks, was originally an elemental divinity. Being the Lord of heaven, Dispiter, he was worshipped as the god of rain, storms, thunder, and lightning, as well as the Prince of Light. The Greek Zeus was the greatest of the Olympian gods. When he and his brothers distributed the government of the world among themselves by lot, Poseidon, Neptune, obtained the sea. Hades, Pluto, the lower world, and Zeus, Jupiter, the heavens, and the upper regions, but the earth became common to all. According to Homer, Zeus dwelt on Mount Olympus, in Thessaly, which was believed to penetrate heaven itself with its lofty summit. He is called the father of gods and men, the most high and powerful among the immortals, and whom all others obey. Such was the Olympian Zeus. But mythology originally, and at various places created such a god. 1. The Arcadian Zeus, who according to legend was born in Arcadia, either on Mount Parrhasium, or on Mount Lycaea. Lycaon, a son of Pelasgus, heroic ancestor of the Pelasgians, the earliest inhabitants of Greece, erected a temple to Zeus Lycaea on the mountain of that name, and instituted the festival of Lycaea in his honor. 2. The Dodonian Zeus, who possessed the most ancient oracle in Greece, at Dodona in Epirus, from which he derived his name. He was a prophetic god. 3. The Cretan Zeus, of whom Hesiod gives an account. He calls Zeus the son of Cronos and Rhea. Cronos was in the habit of swallowing his children immediately after birth, but when Rhea was about to bear Zeus, she applied to Uranus, heaven, and Gaia, earth, for advice as to how the child might be saved. They sent her to Lyctus in Crete, requesting her to bring up her child there. Accordingly she concealed the infant in a cave of Mount Aegaeon, and gave Cronos a stone wrapped up in cloth, which he swallowed in belief that it was his son. There Zeus was brought up on the milk of the goat Amalthea, and the honey provided by the bees of the mountain. 4. The national Hellenic Zeus, whose temple was at Olympia in Elis. Here also Zeus was regarded as the father and king of gods and men. In the course of time the local divinities became united in the minds of the people into one great national divinity, which is apparently not the one whom the chronicler had in mind. In this narrative what he says refers to a local one, not Roman, as his use of the name Jupiter instead of Zeus might indicate the Arcadian god, for he gives him the alias Lysania, a corruption of Lycaea. It was this god who was surnamed Lycaea. Certain traditions concerning one Lycaon are here enlightening. It was he who established the worship of Zeus Lycaea in Arcadia. Some describe him, and not Zeus Lycaea, as the chronicler would have it, as the first civilizer of Arcadia and builder of the town of Lycosura. More often he was represented as an impious king, with a large number of sons as impious as himself. The claim of the chronicler that Jupiter was named after the planet seems improbable. it is more likely that the planets were named after the gods, and that the latter were named after the former. Moreover, the very etymology of the name, as already given, would contradict such a claim. The name refers to, and implies attributes of a god, and not of a planet. Illustration: Babylon and Babylonia 5 1/2 x 8 3/4. This, according to the inscription, is the city of Babylon. Moreover, the chronicle itself assures us that the serious young lady standing on the high pillar in the heart of the city, clad in regal robes, scepter in one hand and sword in the other, is none other than the warlike Semiramis herself, builder, ruler, and defender of that ancient and powerful city. These walls may not be 50 feet wide, and 4 times as high, reckoning to every foot 3 fingers' breadth beyond the ordinary measure of our foot, as Pliny states, but they do look somewhat formidable nevertheless. The stream at the right must be the Euphrates, which flowed through the ancient capital. The dome to the right of the mighty queen is probably the temple of Jupiter Belus, son of Nimrod and father of Ninus. There are other imposing structures, medieval castles, dome-shaped buildings, a watchtower with spacious timbered superstructure, 2 churches, etc. Note the peculiar tree, aspiring to the dizzy heights of Semiramis, and read Mark 11:12-21. Jupiter 2x2. Jupiter is differently portrayed in the Latin and German editions of the Chronicle, but in neither case is the great god portrayed according to the classical ideal and traditions. The portrait in the German edition is that of an elderly bearded gentleman, with the proverbial cap and gown. He emerges from a floral decoration, and strangely enough makes the apostolic sign of blessing. The portrait in the Latin edition is also not a very happy selection. This Jupiter is a little beyond the prime of life, and heavily dressed in cap and gown suitable to a medieval merchant, rhetorician, or doctor of philosophy. Classical portraiture is entirely absent from the Chronicle. Folio 25 Recto: Semiramis, wife of Ninus the Great, king of Assyria, assumed the throne upon the death of her husband, in the 12th year of Abraham. She reigned 42 years. When Ninus died, he left him surviving Semiramis, still a young woman, and their only son, Ninus, who was still a child. She did not consider it wise that so young a son should rule over so great a kingdom. Although reluctant to entrust the kingdom to a minor, yet, being a woman, she did not herself dare to rule over so large a people, who were hardly obedient to a man. So, being a magnanimous woman, able and cunning, she held herself out as the son, and the son as herself, for both were persons of medium stature, and of tender voice, and resembled one another in other respects. Covering her arms, limbs, and head, she stepped forward according to the custom of men. In order that she might not attract too much attention in her new garb, she commanded her people to assume the same manner of dress. And so, by the disguise of her sex, and through the childlike confidence of her son, she attained to royal majesty. And thereafter she accomplished great things, and feared not to disclose her practiced concealment to anyone, and everyone wondered how a woman was able to function as such, and yet excel in strength, as a man. But when at last she tried to tempt her son to cohabit with her, he killed her. See earlier note on Semiramis and Ninus under Trier, folio 23 recto. Ninus, son of Ninus the Great and Semiramis, his wife, was the 4th king of Assyria. He began his reign after that of Semiramis, his mother, in the 53rd year of Abraham, and he reigned 38 years. He silenced the wars that had wearied the kingdom during the reign of his parents. And likewise, as he had exchanged his appearance with his mother, and was seldom seen by men, so he aged amidst a multitude of women. Arius, the 5th Assyrian king, began his reign in the 21st year of Isaac, and he ruled 30 years. During this period Ishmael was born to Abraham, in his 86th year, by Hagar, the Egyptian, who was his Aunt Sarah's maid, and from him came the race of Ishmaelites, who were thereafter called Hagarians, and finally Saracens. As Sarah, Abraham's wife, was without children, as the Holy Scriptures say, she spoke to Abraham, and said, "Go into my maid Hagar, for you may bear children by her." And as this happened, she soon conceived, and thereafter bore Ishmael. At first Sarah lived him as her own son and heir of the principality. But her love waned as soon as her Isaac was born. Therefore, by her advice Ishmael and his mother were sent to another region. and when his mother provided him an Egyptian wife, he bore 12 regal sons, who occupied all the earth from the Euphrates to the Red Sea. The succeeding kings of the Assyrians gave replies to their people by messengers, in the manner of their forebears. The Assyrians, afterward called Syrians, had the kingdom 1300 years. Their last king was Sardanapalus, a man debased by effeminacy. See earlier note on Sardanapalus, folio 24 verso. Sol was the first son of Jupiter, and a brother of Minerva. As Tullius says, he was an eminent and brilliant person of dignified disposition, and the pagans, by reason of his great powers, gave him a name indicating light. For the ancients, misled by Nimrod, believed that fire was the first element of creation. Therefore they gave him the name Sol, which is translated sun. By reason of his mysterious and ingenious ways, they considered him a celestial being, or lord, who had come down from heaven. Helios, called Sol by the Romans, was the god of the sun. He was the son of Hyperion and Thea, and a brother of Selene and Eos. From his father he is frequently called Hyperionatus, or Hyperion. Homer describes Helios as giving light both to gods and men. He rises in the east from Oceanus, traverses the heaven, and descends in the evening in the darkness of the west and Oceanus. The manner in which Helios, during the night, passes from the western into the eastern ocean is not mentioned by Homer, but later poets make him sail in a golden boat, round one half of the earth, and thus arrive in the east, at the point from which he has to rise again. The island of Thrinacia, Sicily, was sacred to Helios, and there he had flocks of sheep and oxen, which were tended by his daughters. Temples of Helios existed in Greece, in very early times. The worship of Sol was introduced at Rome, especially after the Romans had become acquainted with the East, though traces of the worship of the sun and moon occur at an early period. Diana, the first sister of Sol, and the daughter of the first Jupiter, was held in esteem at this time. Tullius frequently mentions her in his book on the nature of the gods. But they say that she is not the one to whom the poets attribute eternal virginity. Diana is an ancient Italian divinity whom the Romans identified with the Greek Artemis. Her worship is said to have been introduced at Rome by Servius Tullius, who dedicated a temple to her on the Aretine, and she appears to have been originally worshipped only by the plebeians. At Rome Diana was the goddess of light, and her name contains the same root as the word dies. As Dianus, Janus, or the god of light, represented the sun, so Diana, the goddess of light, represented the moon. The attributes of the Greek Artemis were afterward described to her. Ceres was in vogue among the Sicilians, and she was a confidant of their king. She was of such ingenuity that she was the first to introduce husbandry among the Sicilians, tamed the oxen, and plowed the earth in 2 furrows, sowed it with seed, separated the grain from the ears, ground it with millstones, and taught the making of bread. Before that time the people subsisted on acorns and wood apples. And so they called her Ceres, the goddess of grain. Ceres, under the name of Demeter, one of the great divinities of the Greeks, was the goddess of the earth, and her name probably signified Mother Earth. She was the protectress of agriculture, and of all the fruits of the earth. She was the daughter of Cronus and Rhea, and sister of Zeus, by whom she became the mother of Persephone, Proserpina. Zeus, without the knowledge of Demeter, had promised Persephone to Adonis, Hades. Demeter, having learned of the abduction which had taken place with the consent of Zeus, in her anger avoided Olympus, and dwelt upon earth among men, conferring blessing wherever she was kindly received, and severely punishing those who repulsed her. As the goddess continued to be angry, and did not allow the earth to produce any fruits, Zeus first sent Iris, and then all the gods, to persuade Demeter to return to Olympus. But she refused to return and to restore fertility to the earth, until she had seen her daughter again. Zeus accordingly sent Hermes into Erebus, to bring back Persephone. Aeneas consented, but gave Persephone part of a pomegranate to eat. Hermes then took her to her mother at Eleusis, who received her with great joy. The earth now brought forth fruit again. The meaning of the legend seems to be ideological. Persephone, who was carried off to the lower world, is the seed corn that remains concealed in the ground part of the year. Persephone, who returns to her mother, is the corn that rises from the ground and nourishes men and animals. The seats of the worship of Demeter and Persephone were Attica, Arcadia, and Sicily. The Athenians pretended that agriculture was first practiced in their country, and that Triptolemus of Eleusis, the favorite of Demeter, was the first who invented the plough and sowed corn. The Romans received from Sicily the worship of Demeter, to whom they gave the name of Ceres. Her worship acquired considerable political importance at Rome. The property of traitors against the Republic was often made over to her temple. The decrees of the Senate were deposited there for the inspection of the tribunes of the people. Illustrations. The illustrations on this page may be divided into two classes. 1. 3 individual portraits, each approximately 2 inches square, arranged in a column at the left, and 2. A composite 2x14 consisting of 6 portraits representing a portion of the lineage of the kings of Assyria. 1. The series to the left is devoted to 3 mythological gods of ancient Greece: Sol, the sun, or king of light; Diana, the goddess of the hunt; and Ceres, the goddess of grain. All 3 are pictured as medieval characters, and none carry the symbols of their divinity. 2. The Assyrian royal lineage began at folio 17 recto, with portraits of Nimrod, Beluzai, and Ninus, respectively the first, second, and third kings, and is here continued in a panel of 6 sovereigns: Semiramis, Ninus, Ninia, Arius, Mamilus, Sparatus, and Amytitus. The queen, in order to show her warlike disposition, holds a formidable sword in her right hand, and a silhouetted object resembling an ornamental D in her left. This symbol is a mystery. Possibly the woodcut was used, or to be used elsewhere, as an initial letter. Semiramis is spoken of at length in the text opposite the illustrations, as well as in other parts of the chronicle. Ninus and Arius are given brief mention. Mamilus, Sparatus, and Amytitus are not referred to in the text at all. The kings all carry orb and scepter, and are crowned. There is nothing special to be said about any of these portraits, except that oddly enough the beard of Arius is braided. The Assyrian royal lineage is continued further on in the chronicle, and most of the portraits here shown are repeated to represent other rulers. Folio 25 verso, and 26 recto. Note, the text of folio 25 verso, and 26 recto, as given in the chronicle, has required rearranging in order to keep the subject matter in proper sequence. In the chronicle, the illustrations to the genealogies begin on a right-hand page and extend from there to the left, and the text follows the same order, as the editor apparently set himself the task of keeping text and illustrations in juxtaposition. We will therefore begin at the right, folio 26 recto. Isaac, son of Abraham, beloved of God, lived for a long time after his father. When Isaac was 60 years of age, twins, namely Jacob and Esau, were born to him by his wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel. Said Isaac was a very virtuous man. He died at the age of 185 years, and was buried at Hebron by his sons. Esau, the hairy huntsman, firstborn, sold his birthright to his brother Jacob for a portion of lentils. Without the consent of his parents, he married a Canaanitish wife according to Genesis 26:34-35. Esau, at the age of 40, took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, and also Bashemath, the daughter of Elon, another Hittite. His brother defrauded him of his father's blessing, and for this Esau determined to slay his brother. But he, Esau, lived in Edom, called Idumea, and later Mount Seir. And as Jacob returned from Mesopotamia, his brother came to him peaceably with 400 men. This is a rather unsatisfactory abridgment of the biblical narrative. It omits the wily advice of Asenath, the wife of Isaac, that Jacob flee from his brother, until Esau's wrath had cooled. Genesis 27:42-45, Jacob's flight to Haran, Genesis 28:10, and hence to Mesopotamia, Genesis 29:1, the fraud practiced on his father-in-law, Laban, Genesis 30:37-43, and 31:19-23. How in fear of Esau he made extensive arrangements to appease his just wrath with 200 she-goats, and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine, and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals, and had his servants drive these to Esau, with fine presentation speeches, Genesis 32:13-23, how he cunningly arranged his caravan should Esau give trouble, Genesis 33:1-3, etc. What wonder that the guileless and forgiving Esau ran to meet and embrace him? Either the chronicler held a brief for Jacob, or space was too precious to tell the whole truth. Jacob was born in the 394th year of the world, and lived 147 years. He had 4 wives, Leah, Rachel, Zilpah, Zelpha, and Bilhah, Bala. Rachel, Jacob's wife, was barren for a long time, but finally she had 2 sons, and died in childbirth. She was buried near Bethlehem. Jacob, the patriarch and most holy man, was born to Isaac, and thereafter, in this 90th year, Joseph was born to him by Rachel. He lived 56 years thereafter, and died in Egypt. End of genealogical text on folio 26 recto. And continuation of genealogical text on folio 25 verso. Levi was the father of all the Levites, from whom all the priesthood sprang. Korah, son of Ishur, quarreled with Aaron concerning the priesthood, because he was the firstborn of Ishur, for which reason he and 250 men were destroyed by fire from heaven. Korah, was the son of Ishur, grandson of Kohath, and great-grandson of Levi. He was a proud and ambitious ringleader, together with others of the tribe of Reuben, against his cousins Moses and Aaron. It was a widespread political rebellion against Moses, who held the leadership, to which the tribe of Reuben, the firstborn, aspired, and from which they had been excluded. With 250 men prominent in the congregation, they went to Moses and Aaron, charging them with usurpation. Moses appealed to the Lord, and Korah and his men were destroyed by fire from above. Miriam, the sister of Moses, was a prophetess, and she made a beautiful song of praise, which she sang. She was leprous for 7 days because of her murmurings against Moses. She died in Kadesh in the wilderness, and was buried there. Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, after the passage of the Red Sea, led the choir of the women of Israel in the sublime song of deliverance, Exodus 15:20. But afterward, having joined Aaron in murmuring against Moses, she was smitten with leprosy, and restored only in answer to the prayers of Moses. She died, and was buried at Kadesh, in the wilderness. Numbers 12:1-15:21. Jacob had 6 children by Leah. Actually, Jacob had 7 children with Leah, all of which are named in the rest of the paragraph, namely, Judah, of whom came the kingly order, and thereafter our Lord Jesus Christ; Reuben, who lost the rights of the firstborn; Simeon, and Levi, of whom came the priestly order; Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah, who was compromised by Shechem. Jacob, on his return from Paddan Aram to Canaan, halted at Shechem. Here Dinah was wronged by Shechem, son of the prince Hamor. His offer of marriage was accepted on condition that he and all the other men in the town be circumcised. But while they were recovering, Dinah's brothers killed all the men, pillaged the place, and made prisoners of the women and children. As the evil city of the Sodomites was destroyed by fire, Abraham sent Narian, by divine command, knew his wife, and she conceived, and when the year was full she bore him a son, whom according to divine command she called Isaac, a name meaning that many people would come of him, and he was circumcised on the 8th day after birth. Folio 26 recto. As previously stated, Ahaziah reigned in Sicyonia. As its first king, Sicyonia is a small district in the northeast of Peloponnesus, bounded on the east by the territory of Corinth, Phlius, and Cleonar, and on the north by the Corinthian Gulf. The area was probably somewhat less than 100 square miles. Its chief town was Sicyon, one of the oldest cities of Greece. It is said to have been originally called Agialeia, after an ancient king, Ahaziah, but was finally called Sicyon. Because of its limited territory, it never attained much political importance. In the Persian War, the Sicyonians sent ships to Salamis. They took part with the Spartans in the Peloponnesian War. Under the Romans it gradually declined, and in the time of Pausanias, in the 2nd century of the Christian era, many of its public buildings were in ruins. Sicyon was for a long time an important seat of Greek art. It gave its name to one of the great schools of painting which was founded by Apamp, and which produced Banphilus and Apelles. It is also said to have been the earliest school of sculpture. The town was also celebrated for the taste and skill displayed in the various articles of dress made by its inhabitants, among which we find mention of a particular kind of shoe that was much prized in all parts of Greece. The country was called Agialeia, after him, now Peloponnesus. After him reigned Europs, the name of 2 mythical personages, one a son of Ahaziah and king of Sicyon, the other a son of Pharonois, the 2nd king, and the third was Telchin, Selkim, 20 years. Perhaps this final clause should read, and the third was Telchin, Selkim, who ruled 20 years. Apis ruled tyrannically, and was slain by Tauchen, his father, and Thelchen, his son. The fourth king of Sicyonia began his reign in the 45th year of Abraham, and 35th year of Semiramis. He ruled 25 years. After him the country formerly known as Agalia was called Apia, and is now known as Peloponnesus. Artus was the fifth king of the Assyrians. Under him, as Augustine writes, Isaac was born. Thelchen, or Thessalian, was the fifth king of Sicyonia. In his reign the times were prosperous and happy, so after his death he was honored as a god, with scarifies and games. After him reigned Toriakoptiramachos, at whose grave they also made sacrifices. Xerxes is the ancient king of Assyria, also called Balius or Balongkos. Under him Jacob was born. The above-named Toriako reigned at the same time. As one reckons 430 years, a great flood occurred in Achaia, in the time of Jacob and King Agigas, or Agigas, sometimes called the Boeotian Autochthon, and sometimes son of Baal and king of the Hectonis, is said to have been the first ruler of the territory of Thebes, which was called after him Ogygia. In his reign the waters of Lake Copais rose above its banks, and inundated the whole valley of Boeotia. This flood is usually called after him the Agigan. The name of Agigas is also connected with the Attic story, for an Attica and Agigan flood is likewise mentioned. Folio 26 recto and 25 verso illustrations. The lineage of Christ, Kant. From Folio 21 verso, the continuation of the biblical genealogies, as resumed from Folio 21 verso, here extends over two opposite pages. It begins with Isaac and his wife, Rebekah, shown by a dual portrait at the head of Folio 26 recto, to the left. From them a branch passes to Esau, the long-hairy hunter at the right. Another branch passes downward to Jacob, shown in a triple portrait with Leah, and Rachel, his two wives. The line proceeds through Rachel on the right to her sons, Benjamin and Joseph, and with Joseph as his wife, Asenath, and beside them their two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, but the 10 children of Joseph's brother, Benjamin, are not shown. Let us now follow the third or left branch, which proceeds from Jacob through Leah. There were 7 children born to Leah by Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. They are all portrayed, except Judah, who is mentioned in the text, but has been omitted from the family album. And there are others to be accounted for. Leah had a handmaid, Zilpah, and when Leah left off bearing, Jacob had sexual relations with Zilpah, and through her added Gad and Asher, to his progeny. This ancillary transaction is shown unconnected, and by itself in a triple portrait at Folio 26 recto, and there the name of Gad and Asher appear, but their mother is erroneously designated as Zilpah and Gil Rachel. She was not the ancillary or handmaid of Rachel, but of Leah. In like manner, when Rachel proved barren, Jacob went in unto her handmaid, Bilhah, Bala, and in time Dan and Naphtali made their appearance. She and her 2 sons by Jacob are shown in a disassociated triple portrait at Folio 25 verso, over which are the following inscriptions. Left, center, right. Naphtali also makes a race. Bilpah, the maid of Leah, Jacob's wife, bore 2 sons. Dan made a people of whom Samson was born. B. The priestly lineage, beginning, on the left of the Folio 25 verso, commences the priestly lineage of Levi. He is shown at the top of the line and has high pontificals, while below him are his 3 sons, Merari, Gershon, and Kohath, cut in that order. Kohath has 4 sons, Ishhor, Isurah, Amram, Hebron, and Uziel, but only the first 2 appear. The first, Ishhor, was married and had 3 sons, Korah, Nepheg, and Zachri, but Korah, Chor, alone is portrayed. To Amram, the second son of Kohath, 3 children were born: Miriam, Moses, and Aaron, all of whom appear and complete the family tree, up to their time. There is nothing individual about these portraits. In these times no general conception seems to have been formed of any particular person, with the exception of God and Christ. Many of these portrayals are somewhat out of tune with the characters for whom they stand. The most unfortunate selection, however, is the portrait of Moses, shown in a tight-fitting garment, as of a page, with a conical cap, whose terminus is carried out, like a pennant, to the nth degree. Moreover, the general conception of Moses is that of a man with the head of a thinker, ample locks, and the flowing beard of a Jupiter. This man is clean-shaven. See the lineage of Sicyonian kings. Beginning at the lower left of folio 26 recto begins the portrait gallery of the kings of Sicyonia, Asiala and Thessalcian, Thessalian, respectively the first and fifth kings, according to the Chronicle. The second and third kings, Europs, and Tauchin, Salcim, respectively, are referred to in the text, but not portrayed. Tauchin was a son of Europs, and father of Apis. Pausanias calls Thelchin a son of Apis. From this we gather that the crown passed from king to king during this period as follows: 1. Asiala, 2. Europs, 3. Tauchin, 4. Apis, and 5. Thelchin. D. The Assyrian lineage, Kunt. From folio 25 recto, the Assyrian line of kings was begun at folio 17 verso, where 1. Belus, and 2. Ninus were shown. On folio 26 recto, this was continued with 3. Semiramis, 4. Ninus, and 5. Arius, making a line of 5 kings, who were there portrayed and described. 3 other mysterious celebrities appeared in the line, folio 25 recto, entitled respectively Mamilus, Sparatus, and Ametitus, but are left without text to clear the mystery. And now we are to resume, at folio 26 recto, with Artus, who being here also called the fifth king, must be identical with Arius. Only one other Assyrian king is added. He is called Xerxes, alias Balius, or Balon cause. Folio 26 verso while Shelah, the son of Judah, was still a child, Judah did not give him Tamar, who had been the wife of Adonan, but he sent her back to her father's house, as a widow. But after Shelah grew up, he was concerned to provide him a wife, so that he would not be killed, as his brothers had been. Tamar disguised herself as a common woman, and sat at the crossroad, and she conceived by Judah, and bore Pharez and Zerah according to Genesis 38. Judah went down from his brethren, and turned into a certain Adullamitic, named Herah. And there he saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, and he took her, and she conceived, and she bore him 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. He took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Was wicked, and the Lord slew him, whereupon Judah gave Tamar to Onan for a wife, and asked him to marry her, and to raise up seed for his deceased brother. Onan did not approve, and spilled his seed on the ground. This displeased the Lord, who slew him. This left Judah but one son, Shelah. He asked Tamar to return to her father's house, and remain a widow, until Shelah should become of age, lest Shelah should also die as his brothers had. And she did so. After some time Judah's wife, who had borne him these 3 sons, died, and he went to his friend Herah the Adullamitic. Tamar heard of his proposed journey, disguised herself, and sat in an open place on the way. Judah saw her, and thought her a harlot, because she had her face covered. He went inside with her, and in consequence Pharez and Zerah were born to him by his daughter-in-law. This is the point to which the chronicler has carried the story. Vincentius in his history tells a good story about Asenath, how beautiful she was, and how honorable, but also, nevertheless, proud and arrogant, disdaining all men. Although she did not want Joseph as a husband at first, yet, after observing his wisdom and discretion, she fully desired him. But he would not accede to her unless she would give up her idolatry. As this caused her much grief, she was finally converted by angelic instruction. Asenath was the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. She is the heroine of a remarkable Jewish and Christian romance, dating at least back to the 5th century CE, in which she renounces her false gods, before her marriage with Joseph. Rhodes, the city on the island of Rhodes, off Lycia, from which it derived its name, was built in 740 BC, in Joseph's time, by the Tauchines and Carians, who soon thereafter were conquered by Phoronois, the king of Argyra. It is one of the islands called the Cyclades for reasons known to the learned. Those who first came there from the east, while the city was being built, as Pomponius writes, and the ground was being dug up, found there a rosebud, after which the city and the island were called Trottis, for, according to the Greek tongue, Trottis means a rose. The island is 900 furlongs in circumference. Among other wonders, it contained a statue 70 cubits high, built by Lintus, a disciple of Lysippus. The city suffered much through wars, and finally at the hands of the Turks. It was finally relieved and protected by the order, of the kings of St. John. Rhodes is the most easterly island of the Aegean, or more specifically, of the Carpathian Sea, and lies off the south coast of Caria. According to mythology, it was first peopled by the Telchines, the children of Thalata, the sea. Homer mentions 3 Dorian settlements, namely, Lindus, Ialissus, and Camirus, formed the Dorian Hexapolis, which was established from a period of unknown antiquity, in the southwest coast of Asia Minor. For centuries the island of Rhodes was the constant seat of war. During the Peloponnesian War, Rhodes was subject to Athens. Later it joined the Spartans. It was subjugated by Athens and Sparta in turn, till the end of the Social War of 355 BCE, when its independence was acknowledged. There were frequent internal dissensions. At the Macedonian conquest they submitted to Alexander, but upon his death expelled the Macedonia garrison. The city of Rhodes successfully endured the most famous siege by Demetrius Poliorcetes, who at length, in admiration of the valor of the besieged, presented them with the engines he had used against them, from the sale of which they defrayed the cost of the celebrated colossus by the artist chairs of Lindus in Rhodes, the favorite pupil of Lysippus, who flourished about 290 BCE. This, his chief work, a statue of the sun, was celebrated as one of the 7 wonders of the world, under the title The Colossus of Rhodes. Its height was upwards of 105 feet, and it was 12 years in the making. It stood at the entrance of the harbor of Rhodes, but there is no authority for the statement that its legs extended over the mouth of the harbor. It was overthrown and broken to pieces by an earthquake 56 years after its erection, in 224 BCE. The fragments remained on the ground 923 years, until they were sold by the general of the Caliph Othman IV to Ajuadamesa, who carried them away on 900 camels, in 672 CE. The Rhodians were at length deprived of their independence by the Roman Emperor Claudius, and their prosperity received its final blow from an earthquake which laid the city of Rhodes in ruins in 155 CE. In the Middle Ages Rhodes became the seat of the celebrated Knights of St. John. Illustration: the city of Rhodes 7x8 and 3/4. The kingdom of Rhodes early became a flourishing one by reason of the skill of its settlers in astronomy and navigation, and other sciences and arts. And here we have its capital jutting out into the sea. The harbor is indicated at the left, and a chain is stretched across its mouth. 3 galleons are in evidence, 2 at sea, under full sail, the 3rd at anchor in the harbor. A pier or wharf leads off to the right. No doubt all these crenellated walls and towers are the ideas of the artist, rather than of Hippodamus of Miletus, the architect, who laid out the city in the 4th century CE. At any rate, the absence of incongruous Gothic spires and steep gabled roofs is a relief. Towers there are in abundance, it is true, but they are square and flat. The roof of every building is flat. All this seems in keeping with the geographical location of the island, the easternmost in the Aegean Sea, and just off the coast of Asia Minor. But why all these squat little windmills with their sugar loaf caps? We see 2 on the pier in the foreground, 4 by the harbor, and 1 in the background. These mills are not mere figments of the imagination. No doubt they had their use in harnessing the winds as sources of power, and were specially adapted to such a location as this, where the winds blow from the west, often with violence, for 9 months of the year. Other artists have testified to their presence by pictorial records. And where is the great Colossus of Rhodes, 105 feet high, which was 12 years in building, and one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world? The text mentions it hazily, but the pen of the artist is entirely silent. N.B. The genealogical portraits on this page, which branch from the opposite one, folio 27 recto, will be considered in the connection with the succeeding text. Folio 27 recto: Judas, in the year of the world 3434. All the kings of Egypt were at this time called Pharaoh. However, this was not their own name, but one of royal distinction, just as with us all Roman emperors are called augmenters of the empire. Ever Pharaoh has his own name. Pharaoh was adopted into Hebrew from the later Egyptian title Pharaoh, Great House. Originally designating the royal establishment in Egypt, it gradually became the appellative of a king, which from the 22nd dynasty, c. 950 BCE, onwards, was regularly attached to the king's name in popular speech. The Hebrew Pharaoh Edco and Pharaoh Hafra, and, as here Pharaoh Mefres, are thus precise renderings from the Egyptian. Pharaoh Mefresh elevated Joseph because of his interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, and he placed a ring upon Joseph's hand, arrayed him in a vestment of fine linen, put a golden collar about his neck, and caused him to be driven through Egypt, and a crier to proclaim that all were to bend the knee to him, and he named him preserver of the world. Not so, according to Genesis 41:45, and Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zophnath-Paneah, which in the Coptic signifies a revealer of secrets, or the man to whom secrets are revealed. He gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On Heliopolis, by whom he had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Phars, in the year of the world 3445. Pharaoh Amenophis did not know Joseph, and he ordered the children of Israel to be oppressed. Under him they were in great distress and severe bondage. Exodus 1:8-22. Pharaoh Nefer, the 9th king, refused to hear the voice of the Lord, commanding him to release the children of Israel. Exodus 5:1-2. For that reason the Lord punished him with the 10 plagues. The plagues, Exodus 7:14-25, 8:1-15, 16-19, 20-32, 9:1-7, 8-12, 13-35, 10:1-20, 21-29. 11:1-10, and 12:29-36. And drowned him and his men in the Red Sea. Exodus 14:27-28. To Joseph, the most chaste patriarch, and a man of zeal, 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim, were born by his wife, Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, the priest. From youth Joseph had been lad of fine stature, and superior to his brother in moral conduct. Because of this his father loved him more than the rest. In consequence his brothers envied him, and at the age of 15, they sold him into Egypt. At the age of 30 he stood before Pharaoh. But the king's wife was fired with passion for him, and said, "Joseph, leave with me." He replied, "The king has given me power over all, except you." And so that she might entice him, she represented herself to be ill, because of her love for him, and she caught him by his garment. But he left it in her hand, and fled from her. Then she spoke to her husband, the king, "A Hebrew servant came to me to mock me," and she showed the king the garment. The king believed her, and caused Joseph to be put into a prison. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him to this place. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and Potiphar made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hands. And it came to pass that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me," etc. Genesis 39:1-7. So it was not the king's wife, but the wife of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, who tried to entice him. But, as Joseph thereafter interpreted his dreams, and prophesied the 7 fruitful and 7 unfruitful years, the king released him from prison, and placed him over all Egypt. And after Joseph had ruled Egypt for 80 years, and had attained the age of 110 years, he died in Egypt. When the Hebrews finally left Egypt, they took his remains with them to Canaan, the Jewish land. To this they had pledged themselves in case of Joseph's death. Illustrations: A lineage of Christ, continued. Here the lineage of Christ begins with Judah, 4th son of Jacob by Leah, and who was not shown in the last genealogy, folio 25 verso. The present section of the tree begins at the upper left of folio 27 recto. Here appears Judah, and beside him his first wife, Shui, Su, a Canaanite, who bore him 3 children, Onan, Onam, and Shelah, Selah, who branch off to the opposite page. It will be remembered that Judah caused his firstborn to marry Tamar. Upon the death of she was passed on to Onan, Judah's second son, and when he, too, suffered death, she was reserved for the 3rd son, Shelah, then still a minor. But in the meantime Tamar, in the guise of a harlot, beguiled Judah, her father-in-law, and by him she bore Pharez, Phars, and Zerah, Zaram. And so from Judah a branch proceeds downward, and to the left to a portrait we find noted Tamar, wife of and concubine of Judah, and to either side are her sons Pharez and Zerah. Apparently for no other reason, and that the opposite text speaks of her, Asenath, the wife of Judah's half-brother, Joseph, is shown here behind a scroll that curls about one of the vines. b. The Egyptian kings. To the right of folio 27 is a panel 2.25x7 portraying three kings of Egypt: Pharaoh Mephres, Pharaoh Amenophes, and Pharaoh Nefer. The first has a sword and orb, the second, both orb and scepter. Each wears a crown. There is nothing about any of them in face or feature, dress, or accessories, that suggests Egypt. C. Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream by a single woodcut, 5 1/16 x 8 and 15/16 at folio 27 recto. Two important incidents in the life of Joseph, far removed in point of time, are depicted. Joseph holds the center of the stage, standing before Pharaoh, at the left, interpreting his dream, while at the right is the wife of Potiphar, labeled as the wife of Pharaoh, still clinging to his flowing mantle, as she gestures him to her medieval bedchamber. The king sits on his Gothic throne in a flowing robe, wearing his crown, and holding a scepter in his extended left hand. He is listening intently to Joseph. His robe is trussed up a bit, exposing the action of his feet. He seems nervous, and appears to be scratching the ankle of one foot with the heel of the other. On the window seat in the background sits a portly gentleman in an ample robe with a fur collar, and wearing a cap. His gesture indicates that he is introducing Joseph to Pharaoh. This must be the king's chief butler, who apprised his master of Joseph's ability to interpret dreams. To perform this office Joseph was brought forth from prison, and not from the bedchamber of Potiphar's wife. Folio 27 verse OS from, in the year of the world 3496. Aram, in the year of the world 3544. Here begins the kingdom of Greece, the Argives, wherein Achaz, a son, as they say, of the sea and the earth, began to reign in the 60th year of Isaac, as the first king of the Greeks in Thessaly. And Achaz, son of Oceanus Antithus, and father of Phoronois and Agiala, was the first king, and most ancient hero of Argos, whence the country is frequently called the land of Achaz. The ancients made several attempts to explain the stories about him. Sometimes they looked upon him as a native of Argos, who, after the flood of Deucalion, led the Argives from the mountains into the plains, and sometimes they regarded him as the leader of an Egyptian or Libyan colony, which settled on the banks of the river, to which this first king also gave his name. This kingdom endured 544 years. However, Cecrops, the Egyptian, left the kingdom in the 94th year of the Hebrew bondage, and ruled for 50 years, as the first king of the Athenians. Cecrops, a hero of the Pelasgic race, is said to have been the first king of Attica. His son, Phrysichton, succeeded him as king of Athens. In his reign Poseidon and Athena contended for the possession of Attica, but Cecrops decided in favor of the goddess. Cecrops is said to have founded Athens, the citadel, which is called the Cecropia, Acropolis, after him. It is also said that he divided Attica into 12 communities, and introduced the first elements of civilized life. He instituted marriage, abolished bloody sacrifices, and taught his subjects how to worship the gods. Later Greek writers describe him as a native of Sais in Egypt, who led a colony of Egyptians into Attica, and thus introduced Egyptian art and civilization. Athens was a celebrated city in Attica. Cicero says it was first built by Apollondus. Plato says Amasis, the Egyptian king, built it, and that according to the Egyptian tongue he gave it a name, which in Greek is Athena. Some say that King Cecrops built it, and after the miraculous appearance of an olive tree, called it Minerva, whom the same tree symbolizes, and in the Greek tongue is called Athena. But others say it was not built by him, but came about of its own accord with increase in the population, during which time Athena was worshipped as a goddess among the people. This city was a fosterer of the liberal arts, and of many philosophers and lovers of wisdom, but through the spawning of the devil, she was a worshipper of idolatry. Augustine, in his City of God, Book 18, writes sundry things about it. For instance, that while King Cecrops was building the city, water burst forth in one place, and at another an olive tree appeared. Now when Apollo, the idolatrous god, was consulted as to the meaning of this miracle, he answered that the olive tree meant Minerva, and that the water meant Neptune, and that the citizens were free to call the city after either. So the people assembled, and the men favored Neptune, and the women, Minerva, but the women succeeded, and so the Greeks called the city Athena, which in Latin is equivalent to Minerva. This enraged Neptune, and he despoiled the land with a flood. In making their peace with Neptune, the Athenians were compelled to inflict a triple punishment upon their wives. Firstly, that they should never again be present in the common councils. Secondly, children born thereafter should not be named after their mothers. Thirdly, no one should name his daughter Athena. Their 17th and last king was Cordus, in the time of Samuel. And although this city was once upon a time very mighty and celebrated, it is now a little city without distinction, which a Florentine surrendered to Mohammed, for, although he long sought the aid of Italy, he did not succeed in getting it. Illustrations: A small portrait of Inikas, about 2 inches square, appears in the upper left-hand corner. He wears a crown and has his scepter in hand. There is nothing distinctive about it, but then, who can say how a mythical Greek king should look? B. Lineage of Christ, Cont. At folio 27 recto, Phares, the fourth son of Judah, was cut off without issue. But as already noted, Phares, or Perez, had 2 sons, Hezron and Hamul. The importance of Phares lies in the fact that he was the ancestor of David through Boaz and Ruth, and then of Christ. His descendants were in all probability the most numerous among the families of Judah. Hence the blessing of the elders on Boaz, "Let thy house be like the house of Perez." Ruth 4:12. From Hezron, his first son, came Jerahmeel, Ram, and Caleb, and through Ram was traced the line of the royal house of David. So now, to continue the lineage of Phares, we have here, folio 27 verso, as from Hezron, his firstborn, and Aram, Ram, the firstborn of Hezron. Hamul, the second son of Phares, has been discarded, as have also Jerahmeel and Caleb, the other sons of Hezron. See, Athens. The city of Athens is here represented by the same woodcut that has already done service for the city of Themyscira, the capital of the Amazons, folio 19 verso, and of course we look in vain for the Acropolis, and the numerous temples, buildings, and monuments that reflect the splendor of the ancient city. Folio 28 recto. Minerva, most celebrated of women, appeared on Lake Tritonotis, in the 58th year of Isaac. She was also called Pallas after Pallanti, an island of Thrace, where she was reared, or after Pallas, Pallanti, the giant, whom she slew. She was Jove's eldest daughter, and among the barbarous Africans made many discoveries, until then unknown, for which reason, not only the Africans, but the Greeks as well, believed Minerva to have been born without a mother out of the head of Jove, for her ancestry was unknown. She was the first to invent spinning in wool, then unknown to man, and how to cleanse the wool, and to comb it with an iron comb, and she taught them how to spin it. In this manner she invented weaving, and the wool-makers, cloth-makers, and weavers, as Ovid testifies, set aside a holiday in memory of the time when Minerva flourished. She also discovered and taught the use of oil, then unknown to man. She is also, as Cicero says, called the goddess of wisdom, and the discoverer of the arts. As her renown and reputation spread far and wide, a number of temples were erected to her, particularly